Hello, everyone. We are in Alpharetta, Georgia this week, and we have the honor of spending some time with the beloved Wayne Wilson of Heidelberg Cement. I don't use the term beloved loosely. As the old saying goes, to know him is to love him. All of us in this industry have relied on Wayne to help us understand the mysteries of Portland cement, and most recently, the many positive benefits of Portland limestone cement. I think it's safe to say that Wayne has conducted and interpreted petrographic analysis for every producer in the state, including me, of course. It will come as no surprise to you that Wayne's favorite Allman Brothers song is Whipping Post. Remember that, Greg Allman? Oh, yeah. I met Wayne nearly 25 years ago within weeks of joining Fulton Concrete Company. At that time, he was in technical services with Holcim, one of our cement suppliers. In a recent podcast, I stated that Cecil Bentley was the greatest influence in my learning about concrete and proper concrete placement. Wayne Wilson has been the most influential person in my grasp of cement and the cement manufacturing process. I and many of you owe Wayne a debt of gratitude for his wisdom, passion, and promotion of the cement industry and ready-mix. Furthermore, we are most grateful to Wayne for his long-standing leadership of the Georgia Chapter of the ACI. Wayne, it's so good to be with you today. Please tell us your story.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you spending the time getting my story. Well, I guess talk a little bit about myself. I think I'm a Georgia boy, and to relate on how I wound up in Georgia, I need to start off with my dad. My dad was born and raised in Arlington, Texas, and so that's where he's from. That's where he grew up. But his family, he always wanted to be an engineer. And his family actually moved to Georgia, to Mableton, Georgia, so he could enroll and go to Georgia Tech. So that's how we wound up in Georgia.
I did not know that.
So he started Georgia Tech in 1954 and went off and on through different odd jobs. There's a 2-year stint in the Army, and it was while he was at Georgia Tech that he met my mother, who's originally from Decatur, at an Agnes Scott social. Because at that time, Georgia Tech was not co-ed. And so he met my mom there, and they got married in 59, I think. But he graduated from Georgia Tech in 1962, the year I was born.
Wow.
Was born at Emory University Hospital. We lived in Mableton at the time. And then a little later on, when my two sisters came along, we moved to Smyrna, Georgia. And that's where I spent my entirety at Smyrna, Georgia. And while he was in Smyrna, he worked as a draftsman for Watson Browning and different companies at the time. He did some internships with the Georgia DOT. But when he moved to Smyrna, he started his own company after he got his professional engineer's license in Smyrna, Delta Engineers and Land Surveyors. My dad was a little unique. He had a professional engineer's license, and he was also a registered land surveyor. So he started this company in Smyrna. So we grew up in Smyrna, and that's where I spent my summers since I started working, I was 11 years old. I spent my summers on a land surveying crew. Started out, carrying the water jug for the people on the crew, and then graduated to cutting line, turning angles, measuring distances with a steel tape, and that's what I did in my early years. My dad was also the secretary-treasurer of SAMSOG, which was the Surveying and Mapping Society of Georgia.
Interesting.
And some of my fondest memories are they always had their annual meetings at Jekyll Island, very similar to the Ponte Vedra experience.
Yes.
Families would go, and some of my fondest memories are those association meetings at Jekyll Island. My dad was pretty influenced in the industry. He had a little bit of a dry sense of humor of which I inherited. I can remember one time they gave him an award, Land Surveyor of the Year award at one of the annual meetings. And he got up to do an acceptance speak, and he introduced my mother to the rest of the group as his first wife. And everybody got a little bit chuckle. It was his first. It was his only
true.
wife.
It was his first and
it
only
was true.
One. Let me ask you a quick question.
All right,
Let me pause
all right.
real quick. So in his business, was most of his work the surveying, or did he also do civil design work?
He did some civil design as well, and that's what made his company unique.
Yes.
He could stand. Most of it was drainage design, retention ponds,
Yes.
that kind of stuff. So it was more land development related.
Gotcha.
But so that's where I spent, and that was some of my fondest memories of there. And my mother, she was a stay-at-home mom. She was a seamstress, so we would go to these meetings, and we developed a reputation of being the Wilson family because she always made matching outfits for me and my two sisters, and his sense of humor. One quick funny story. At a young age, my dad had these sayings, these little mannerisms that were nonsensical that he used as kind of groundbreakers when he met people.
Right.
One of his favorite ones that is always colder in the mountains than it is in the summertime, which makes no sense. But it was just things like that. But he taught us as little kids. He taught us this little saying, and when we would go to these meetings at the opening receptions and stuff, he would ask somebody that he had never met at the meeting. He would ask them a question. He would say, "Do you know what the difference between an orange is?" And the people would look at him like he was crazy. And he said, "You don't know what the difference between an orange is?" And he'd say, wait, come over here and tell him what the difference between an orange is. And I would just look at him and say, "It's a rabbit." and he would say, "Well, why is it a rabbit?" And I would say, "Because vests don't have sleeves."
Oh my word!
And the people would look at us like we were crazy, and we would, giggle.
And as far as they could see, it was you just were
it was
a
just
random,
just a neat thing. But anyway, my dad shut his business down. In 1977, Governor Busby appointed him to the Georgia State Board of Registration for Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. And then in 1979, the executive director was retiring, and he asked my dad if he would be the executive director of the Board of Registration. So he shut down his land surveying business in 75, and he was the executive director for the Georgia Chapter ACI. And I can remember, Georgia Chapter.
I knew what
ACI,
you meant.
Yeah,
of the land surveyors.
The Georgia State Board of Registration. I remember because I was the first time I met Dan Brown.
Right.
I looked on the wall at his PE license, and my dad's signature was in the lower right corner.
That's pretty cool.
So he was responsible for all that for the state of Georgia. And he was the executive director until he died early in 1986. So he was only 52 years old when he passed away.
Wow.
I was 27, and so he passed away with the state. And so he was working for the state when he retired, or when he passed away.
Yes.
And then my mother, she passed away early. She died in 1999 at 62.
Yes. Very
complications related to diabetes. But that's kind of the short family history. Like I said, I have two sisters. One lives in Las Vegas, and the other one lives locally here in Roswell. But so that's kind of how we wound up in Georgia and family history.
That's some really kind of explains a little bit about your trajectory. I think that clearly the seeds were planted. So
they were at the time.
So now take us on to to the construction materials.
Construction industry. So how I got in the construction industry, like I said, I grew up in Smyrna, graduated from Wills High School in 1980. I knew I thought I wanted to be an engineer. I can remember applying to schools like Tennessee Tech, Texas Tech. I wanted to go to Texas Tech, but my dad was like, "Why would you want to go to one of those schools when the greatest school in the Southeast is right here in our backyard. And so it was kind of predetermined, and I wasn't sure I had the grades to get into Georgia Tech, but I think unbeknownst to me, he may have pulled some strings. And anyway, I got into Georgia Tech. And I went to Georgia Tech, and I started out, I maybe thinking I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I tried ceramics engineering.
Right.
I tried textile engineering.
Yes.
And honestly, I was there from 1980 to spring of 83. I wasn't the best student. It wasn't a really good fit for me. Just things, as bad as I wanted to, it just wasn't working out very well.
Right.
So, believe it or not, my grades were horrible too. And I left in spring of 83, right before I think the school was going to ask me to leave. And I left and came back home to Smyrna and went to work for Nationwide Auto Parts. I was a little bit of a motorhead in high school and had rebuilt engines and done things like that. And so I worked the parts counter at Nationwide Auto Parts for about a year in Smyrna. And I woke up one day and I was like, I'm never going to make anything of myself at $4.75 an hour. So I went to my dad and I said, I think I need to go back to school. And because of his connections with the State Board of Registration, he got me a meeting with the president of the college at Southern Tech in Marietta. I still remember to this day, I went to the campus, I went to the president's office, sat down with him, and we had about an hour-long meeting about me, what I wanted to do, and he told me a little bit about Southern Tech, and he felt like that maybe the school would be a good fit for me.
Yes.
So I didn't fill out an application, I didn't apply or anything. He just picked up the phone, made a phone call, and the next week
you were enrolled.
I was enrolled at Southern Tech.
That's cool.
In the civil engineering department. I'd made up my mind on civil engineering, so that's where I went to school, and I graduated from Southern Tech with a degree in civil engineering technology in 1987. And then how I got into the concrete industry, while I was at Southern Tech, I had run out of money from my summer jobs.
Right.
And I needed income to continue school, and Southern Tech at the time had a co-op program. So I wound up getting a co-op job with ATEC, which was a construction materials testing geotechnical firm in Kennesaw, Georgia, or Marietta, Georgia, I guess, at the time. So they gave me a job, and at that time the school was on a quarter system, so you would work spring and summer,
right,
and then go to school fall and winter. So I went there and I worked one group with them, and I hit it off, and that's where I first had my exposure to concrete testing, making cylinders, running soil compaction test, and all of that stuff kind of fascinated me. And so the second go around with them on the second quarter semester rotation, I hit it off with them, and things went really well, and they asked me if I would continue essentially full-time working while I was in school.
Nice.
Helping them review reports and anything. So I spent the next 13 years at ATEC.
Now, let me ask you a question, quick question. So did ATEC morph into another familiar, I don't remember that name.
Well,
did they, but you know what I mean? Did they become another firm?
They were bought out by a company called ATC.
I think I remember them.
At a time, and I think ATC morphed into Atlas, maybe. I can't remember. But when I was there at the time, there were three main companies. There was ATEC, Atlanta Testing and Engineering, and Law Engineering.
Gotcha.
So those were the big three.
Right.
In Atlanta
at
the time. But I worked there, and that's where I got my first exposure. And honestly, while I was there, that's where I met most of the people in the industry for the first time, the John Cooks, the Alan Sweats, Butch Thompson with Atlanta Coring, Tim Moss, Chad Herron, Wayne Davis.
Now, was Sean McCormick at?
Sean was at Law at the time.
Law, yeah.
Yeah, he was at Law. And I met all these folks, and I developed a little bit of a reputation for, I was very detailed oriented and paid attention to particulars.
Right.
So it morphed into, if there was a core broken by a ready-mix company in Atlanta, they brought them to me because they knew that I would personally make sure that the testing was done correctly. And I developed a close relationship with all of those folks during that period of time.
Yes.
And that's where I also met Don Dixon, who did petrography. He did consulting for people in the industry. And he had an episode, I'm trying to think when it was. It was around 1995, maybe, a problem with his back. And we had worked together on several different jobs, and he came to me and said, I'm going to be incapacitated for a while. Can you come in and help me with some of these jobs?
Yes.
And that's where I first learned petrography. He wasn't there, but I was lucky. He had a whole file cabinet of reports and a room in the back that had cores. So I would spend nights working in his little laboratory, looking at pieces of concrete and seeing something, and then reading one of his reports, going get those samples, comparing the two, and I worked through, and that's how I taught myself petrography during that period of time. And I did pretty good because I had a background with field experience, and I could relate the two on what was going on. And so that's where I worked. And then I made the big decision in 1997, after 13 years at ATEC, I decided to go to work for Don Dixon full time.
Yes.
So I went to work for him in Lawrenceville, and that worked out very well. I wanted to immerse myself in the consulting and the petrography world, but it just so happens when I started, he had a falling out with his daughter who was doing the books at the time. She left. He had another episode with his back, and it wound up just being me.
Yes.
And I kept things afloat for about 2 years, and then he decided he was going to retire and move to Florida. And I think I disappointed him a little bit. I think in his mind, I would take over his business. But that 2-year episode that I was there, living paycheck to paycheck and worrying whether or not I was going to, I couldn't take it. So I wound up going back into the general consulting business with Nova Engineering.
Hang on one quick second.
Yep.
Question. So what was the scope of work there with Don? What was it? Strictly petrography? And you know what I'm saying? What was your the different things that the offerings that you?
So it was forensic engineering,
okay,
problem resolution, and petrography.
Got it.
I mean, Don had developed a reputation that anybody in the ready-mix industry in Atlanta, if they had a problem and they knew it was going to go to court or it was going to be illegal, it was usually a race to get Don on your team before the other people did, because he was that good.
Interesting.
So it was, and he was, I learned a lot from Don, and I owe a lot to him in this industry because he's the one that opened my eyes to some of the textbook stuff and the particulars about cement hydration, and that's where it all started with him. When he went to Florida, I went back to Nova. Barry Rozeski, the guy that hired me at ATEC, because they started Nova when the ATC merger went. They opened Nova Engineering and started. And I was there for about 1.5 years, and then out of the blue, Tom Evers.
Oh, yeah.
With Holnam at the time. Holnam
right.
at the time. He came to me and said, we're building a new slag facility in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yep.
We need somebody to help us develop that industry in Georgia. I've heard some good things about you. Are you interested to come working for a cement company? And the thought of working for a cement company was appealing.
I bet it was.
It was. And so I pulled the trigger. And so in 2000, I started to work for Holnam, which became Holcim, Lafarge Holcim, Amrise today.
Yes.
And I wound up staying there for 23 years.
Wow.
So I was there from 2023, and that's where I was immersed in cement hydration and the mechanics of cement production and all of that stuff. Wholesale at the time was big into masonry. I spent a lot of times on mortar, troubleshooting issues with color and strength. And so it was a tremendous learning experience. I had several opportunities to go to several different cement schools. The Wholesale had one in Switzerland. It was a 2-week intensive thing, quarry to lorry. And I learned the basics.
That's funny, quarry to lorry.
Yeah, quarry to lorry. And it was so it was a learning experience, and that I flourished in that industry. So yeah, and that's where I got most of my background. And then
let me pause you real quick.
Right, okay.
That's the way these things go. I warned you. When I met you, it was in 2002, and your colleague, was it Gary Knight?
Gary Knight.
Gary Knight. Refresh my memory on the roles that your complementary roles. I mean, what did Gary do? And you know what I'm saying? In other words, what was Gary at that time? Just curious.
Well, when I was hired, there was another tech service engineer in the office, Pat O'Brien. So there were 2 of us in the office. Gary had just left.
Okay.
And gone to the corporate office in Dundee, Michigan.
That's right.
So he was in Michigan.
Yes.
Right. And then so he wasn't there. He left Dundee and went back to work for Grace for a period of time.
Yes, I do remember that.
And then he wound up leaving Grace and coming back to Wholesale, which would have been probably around 2018, maybe, something like that.
Yeah.
So we were in the same office as 2 tech service engineers from 18 to maybe 2020, something like that.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so we developed quite the relationship. I remember a story real quick about, we were at an ACI convention meeting, and Gary can be a little flamboyant. We took Nick Maloof out to dinner, and he wound up ordering 2 seafood towers. We were in Boston, and these things were $800 a piece,
right,
if I remember correctly. And I can remember when we got back to Atlanta, Ken Pullman at the time was our boss.
Yes.
I can remember Ken's office was at the end of the hall. I can remember to this day Ken saying, "Gary," because he had turned in his expense report. And Gary was trying to make the argument that the dinner was still less than a tanker of cement. And so that's how he justified the big meal expense for Thomas Concrete. So
that's a good story. And I could hear Ken.
Yeah.
I could hear him.
But it was, looking at my notes real quick, I just thought of something related to the family that's very important to me that I forgot.
Yes.
And I need to talk a little bit about how I met my wife.
Yes.
She, when I was at ATEC, she lived in Maine at the time. And her dad had an associate whose daughter worked for ATEC. And she was in Maine, and she wanted to move back to Georgia with her parents. They lived in Snellville. And she called her dad and said, I want to come back to Georgia. I need to get a roommate. So he wound up hooking her up with this young lady that worked for ATEC. So she came to Atlanta in 1991, and her first weekend in Georgia, she went out for drinks after work with this young lady and some of the people that I work with.
Right.
I was working on a job in South Georgia at the time, so I wasn't there. But these people met her, and they told her that we got somebody that works for you that you're going to marry.
Oh, gosh.
So we, she's like, okay, whatever. But the next weekend, they had a welcome to Atlanta party. And I met her at this party. And we hit it off, and she gave me her number. And the next week, I was on one of those jail jobs in South Georgia, and I was working, dawn to
Right,
dark every
right.
day. It got to be Thursday and I hadn't called her yet. So she called me and she said, well, you hadn't called me yet. And I just want to make sure you had the right number. And I'm like, well, I've got it. I just hadn't had a chance. And I don't know. But anyway, so we actually went out the next weekend, and 2 weeks later, I asked her to marry me.
No way. Woo.
I know. And we were married within the year.
That is quite a story. And it's Suzanne, right?
Suzanne, yeah.
Suzanne. Yeah,
and we were married within the year. And it's funny because we got married at First United Methodist Church in Smyrna. And before the pastor would marry you, you were required to go to 2 little meetings,
right.
3 meetings with the minister beforehand. And I can remember our second sit-down meeting with him. He gave us one of those written compatibility tests. And we took the test, and he started grading the paperwork. And he slowed down, and he got about halfway through the 3rd page, and he was like, he had this very concerned look on his face. He wadded up the papers and threw them away. And he didn't say anything about it. And I asked him several years later, I said, why did you throw those away? And he said, Wayne, I have never seen 2 people that are so polar opposite.
No way.
On paper, you guys should never work. And it's true. If I say black, she says white. She's the social butterfly. I'm a little bit of a introvert in a lot of cases. And so it just worked.
That's a great story.
Worked. And we have two kids now. Thomas Murray Wilson, named after my dad, Thomas Murray Wilson II. He lives in Flowery Branch. He drives, he's a Teamster. He drives for UPS.
Yes.
He married his high school sweetheart, who's a orchestra director at Mill Creek High School, Tori Brown Wilson. They gave us our first grandchild right at a year ago. And then my daughter, Toby Marie, she graduated from UGA with a degree in archaeology, of all things. But she now lives in Savannah and sells beer for Service Brewery. And she married her high school sweetheart, Walker Moe, who is now the coastal sales rep for Thomas Concrete.
No kidding.
He met Joseph Bernard at Ponte Vedra on one of the golf trips, playing golf with Joseph.
What
that I
a
set up because he
story.
played for me. So now he's my legacy in the concrete
That's
industry
really
moving
cool.
forward.
That's,
So
Toby Moe.
Toby Moe.
Toby Moe.
Toby Moe.
Okay.
Toby Moe. Yeah. So I'm glad I got.
No, I'm
so
very glad we regrouped on that.
So that's where I am today in the industry. So.
So yeah, let me ponder. You've unloaded a lot of great information, and we could go in so many different directions. Let me ask you this: you've been in it a long time, obviously, really almost all your life when you consider growing up with your dad's business and such. But what would you say that you really, really, really enjoy about our industry? What pleases you, gratifies you about this work, and what would you say?
I guess number one, and I think most people that have done these podcasts go down that route, is the people.
Yes.
And the family atmosphere of this industry. When it comes to concrete in general, just the challenges of concrete, the variety, the problem-solving aspects of it, I love that. I really, 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 really do. And that's what I love about this industry. And I guess I could parallel that into, I told about my experience and how I got into the concrete industry. Kind of a parallel path is my association with Georgia Chapter American Concrete Institute, how that all happened, because it's a similar thing and it's kind of a parallel path. And I think about that, how I got involved with Georgia Chapter ACI, because they're the kind of the teaching end of things,
Right.
and the certification side. And the way all that came about was I was elected just to the board of directors for the Georgia chapter. I was a chapter president in 2007. And about that time, there was a guy in the chapter, Mel Gallinant.
I remember Mel.
Mel, he retired, and he kind of ran the chapter newsletter. And he was looking for somebody to do that. And I took on that responsibility and took care of that. And then I got more and more involved with the chapter, helping with the certification exams and all that other stuff. But at the time, Sam Morris
Yes.
pretty much ran things at the chapter. Well, in 2013, Sam had a stroke unexpectedly and wound up passing away probably about 5 or 6 months later. In all of that, she ran everything, and everything just stopped. And I was so involved at the time, I wound up picking up the pieces,
Yes.
getting some paperwork from her house, and it just happened overnight.
Right.
I was the president again in 2017. I had all of this responsibility that the board, they rewrote their charter and created an executive director position, because I was signing contracts with the association and doing all of these things. And they created that position. So in 2020, they made me the executive director, and that's where I've been ever since. And, today we do over 50 exams every year. I mean, we certify 2,000, 3,000 people, and the mechanics and making all of that happen.
Yes.
I'm blessed with some people that help me day to day as far as the certification activities. People like Stephen Maloof, Derek Brown, Donnie Simmons, Patrick Palmer, Michael LeGrand, Wilbur Bragg, and these people help me on the day-to-day operations. But so that's kind of the history there. And
real quick, funny story. Yeah. My little encounter nearly 25 years ago with Cecil.
Yep.
On that Brassfield fiasco. When we were going to set up that class there at Fulton Concrete, and somebody said, well, you need to call Sam and work, Sam and Cecil and so on and so forth. And so I'll never forget, I called Sam, and a woman answered Sam's phone. Well, that was Sam. I had no idea, but I don't even know that I ever actually met Sam, but we communicated quite a bit, and she was always very, very helpful. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I did not know that the origin of your involvement. So thank you for that.
It's one of those things where it was you volunteer to help, and it snowballs, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, how did I get here?
Yeah, and who else is going to do it? It's almost like it's a mission of mercy. If you don't,
it's a I don't know. I would call it love or a curse, but it's just, I care so much about it, and I want it done right that I continue to do that to this day.
So, talking about, I always like to hear perspectives on big, industry changes, however you want to frame it, an industry change or a paradigm shift. There are all those different terms where significant change. And as you were talking earlier about the petrography, I almost asked you then, but I knew I would get to this question. So why don't we start, if we could, on this question about the big changes over the span of your involvement.
Well, I guess
could you speak a little bit of anything around the petrographic analysis that's really?
I can.
Yeah.
Let me back up just a little bit. There's two things one of them is just kind of a business related thing, and then I'll talk about concrete and the concrete of science. From a business, some things significant changes that really seem to change the industry. I'm thinking on the business side. To me, when I was at ATAC, I can clearly remember when we got our first fax machine.
Huh. Yes.
Because used to we would do these proposals and you'd bind them up in a book and a courier would get them and deliver them to the architect's office for a job and stuff. When the fax machine came along, you could fax them.
Mm-hmm.
And then right after that, they got pagers, cell phones, Blackberries, iPhone. Now we got social media. So just the speed of the business industry itself,
the communications
has snowballed so fast.
Yes.
And it's happened so fast. And you can relate that to the concrete experience a little bit when you talk about some things that have changed about understanding the hydration kinetics of cement and petrography, and able to look at something and visualize what happened on the job site,
mm-hmm.
put the two things together to answer a question. What happened? And concrete and cement hydration is a little bit unique in that it's a pretty basic understanding, the basic science of what happens when a cement particle, a clinker particle, gets combined with water. Everybody knows the hydration kinetics, that clinker piece morphs through hydration into calcium silicohydrate,
mm-hmm.
which is a crystal that holds everything together. Everybody knows the chemical formula and how that works. But there are so many variables in cement production, concrete production, the environmental conditions on the day that the concrete is placed, that there are an infinite number of paths to get from point A, clinker,
yes,
to calcium silicohydrate, point B.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the start and the finish, but the path that you take to get there is infinite. It's like a squirrel cage,
mm-hmm.
a spaghetti graph. They're not the same. They're not, and they won't ever be the same because of the number of variables involved. And that's the challenge, is
right.
When you're looking at trying to diagnose a problem, you're trying to consider all of those variables to answer a question, why? And a lot of times you can't get the specific why, the smoking gun, because there's an infinite number of variables. So it's a challenge, and that's the exciting part to me.
So on the petrographic
mm-hmm.
analysis, is that it in and of itself pretty much as it was when you began working with Don and everything?
Yes.
From a technology, there's not some big super advancement in that. You're using what kind of what is it you're using?
It's an optical microscope.
An optical, yeah.
Well,
microscope.
today's microscopes, the good ones are digital.
Digital.
So I guess
there's been some enhancements.
There is the technologies today, the quality of the images that you can collect and look and understand, the number of magnification. They even got TEC or SGS TEC. They've got one that actually has a small infrared XRD attachment on it, so you can actually shoot a particle and destroy it and capture some of the gas and get some elemental analysis on it. So I mean, there are some technology advances there, but it's still, in my petrography report's a little bit different because of my experience. I strive, before I write something down on paper, I want to make sure. I hate to be wrong.
Oh yeah.
I don't like to be wrong. So I've learned that over the years you have to vet your observations with information that you've gotten from the job site. You have to, because so many times I've tried to diagnose something, and you talk to somebody or you look at what you're seeing and you're hearing what the ready-mix producers talk, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Yes. And
it's frustrating to me when I do that and I go back to the ready-mix producer and I tell them, look, I'm seeing this. It does not make sense with what you're telling me. You're like, well, now that you mention that, We did change the sand about that time. You're like, "Oh, that may have been something good to know at the time," but so yeah.
So that was kind of backward looking, big changes. Let's shift gears to forward looking and the things that where you are today as you look ahead. And I'm obviously, you know, in our technical committee of the associate of GRMCA, which you are a key part of, we are constantly talking about challenges.
Yes.
And what would you say are the ones, or you know, on the horizon or we're coming to that you would make note of, things that you think about that you feel like we're going to have to solve, whatever they may be, but just future challenges, if you will.
Well, I guess to me, one of the biggest challenges in the industry today, on both material side and the ready mix side, is uniformity.
Yeah.
So the ability to manufacture a cement to a given set of standards, or to make it the same.
Yes.
To make your aggregate the same shape, the same gradation, you know. The batching plants, we can weigh up materials pretty precisely, but in my opinion, in the current system, the measurement of water and the control of water in the end mix is something that's left to be desired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's not accurate measurements of moisture content for a lot of cases, control of water at the slump rack, and if you don't control the moisture, you're not controlling the volume of materials in the mix as well. So uniformity on all that.
So maybe in another way to say that too is just, and it's always been a challenge, and that is the managing the variability of all of
Correct.
Managing the variability of each of the raw materials into ready mix, and then managing.
And you know, a funny story about you that I still remember, that one of the very first times I met you at Fulton, you had it, I knew you weren't from the industry when you came in,
right?
But you had it in your mind that you didn't need, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly or not, but you didn't need to do so much testing on your end. You felt like that if you had the uniform cement going in, the uniform aggregate, the uniform admixture, if you had all of that,
yes.
And I can remember you had your Excel spreadsheet,
yes.
You had your uniformity. You said, if I have all of these materials,
yes.
that when I put them together, everything will be fine. And I can remember getting from that meeting, it was Gene Bell. We were driving back, and I said, this man has lost his freaking mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about, because the number of variables involved in the equation, you can never assure yourself 100% of X. Because yeah.
No, and you know what's so fun? It's so funny to hear you say that, because what it reminds me of, you know, I grew up, I cut my teeth in pulp and paper, as you may or may not remember.
I do.
And in that world, in that mindset, as paper makers, there really was the idea that the real work was to get consistency in all of those raw material streams, because if you could do that, you had consistent paper. Yeah. You know, your tensile strengths and your thickness, your calipers, so on and so forth. So in the world that I grew up in,
and it's true.
You know what I mean? That was what you mastered. You were
sure.
Your challenge was so then I come into ready mix concrete, and you know, you take what you know. That was my strength. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I do remember that. And I gave you guys quite a time.
Yes, you did. And I mean, there is a grain of truth to that. I mean, if you do have uniform materials, it helps management, but you can't ever get away from, because I tell people all the time, if you ever get to the point that you think you have concrete cement hydration, if you have everything figured out,
right,
you're setting yourself up for failure, because you will fail. Because sometimes it does something that you cannot explain and you don't know why. It just happens.
So a little bit more on, as we look ahead, and where we are in the world today. And we've talked about this a lot in technical committee and in our work with our it's Lee Thrasher leads our design and control.
Right.
I had to think about it for a minute.
Yep.
But the idea of the chain, the of course we've got the Portland limestone cement. We've got new pozzolan. So what I've gathered is going forward, it's even more important.
This is true.
Because of the variation in all the various cements and in the pozzolans, and which tied into our conversations, of course, around the testing, our test specimens in the field
Right.
for strength. That one of the things we need to have is that good data there, because we're having we need to be smart in the way that we design these mixes. So say a little bit about
I guess
those
to
challenges.
me, as it relates to testing and measuring the concrete strength, everything revolved around that is another layer of variability to the fabricating the sample, compression testing, curing, storage, all that other stuff. And to me, looking forward, I think the future is, when I talked about the clinker to CSH scenario, the number of variables and how you can get there, but the root formula there, the chemical formula, the end product to measure that reactivity is heat, because it's an exothermic reaction. So I think if we could ever get to the point where you're using some of these newfangled sensors, these maturity meters,
right,
and measuring that heat,
yes,
and relate that heat signature to strength, to me, that's the future.
yes.
Because then all of the other variables kind of go out the window, because you're
managing
managing the two things that really matter.
Yes.
So to me,
that would be a breakthrough.
It would be, if you could ever get to the point where that you get the reliable data and you can measure that, because then you could change all of the cement components, the water cement. You could change all those things, and
observe
the heat signature.
Heat. Yes.
And relate that to the strength.
That's pretty cool.
So to me, I think that's something that should be focused on in this day and age of AI and the learning and all that other stuff. I think that's the direction that the industry should be moving.
So changing gears a little bit again to, I'm always interested to hear about people. We all are shaped by, leaders that we've worked for and around, and also our peers, of course. But who would you say are some of the more the people who really influenced you in your life, and how did they shape your approach to both business and life in general?
Well, I guess I look back on some of the bosses that I've had over the years. Number one was my dad. He was a very early influence on and reinforcing a work ethic in me and doing things. And then my first boss at ATEC, Barry Rozeski, he was very pragmatic, and I would come to him sometimes like, I can't. He says, well, you can't. We got to make it happen. You got things like that. And of course, Don Dixon, the school teacher who taught me so much, and then Tom Evers, who introduced me to this industry. Tom was a very unique manager, and then I can remember the first day I was hired, we had lunch. He took me to pick up my truck, and then we got back to the office in Duluth, and he showed me where I was going to sit, and then he went down the hall and he was gone.
That was it.
You do whatever you need to do, and we'll have lunch next week. But so very hands off. And then of course, Ken Pullman was a very influential, at that time. And there, I had another, for a short period of time, I had a young lady from Australia, Shawnee Smith. I don't know if you ever remember her.
I remember meeting her.
She was a very flamboyant person, but she was a unique individual. We used to have, flat out screaming arguments about something. And she taught me a lot about, you can have arguments, but when you get done with your argument, you usually decide who had the better point or who was right, and you moved on. She never carried a grudge.
Right.
She was the one that told me one time, I can remember we had an interview or an annual review. And I asked her, I said, so what do you think my strong point is? And she said, well, your strongest point, your biggest attribute is that you're open and honest with our customers and they trust what you tell them. And I said, okay, I'd go with that. I said, well, what's my biggest negative? And she said, you're open and honest with your customers. And sometimes you say too much. So
that's great.
So it was,
that's
I
great.
always remember that about her. And then as far as the industry, I look at certain people that I consider, they're my friends, and how they've influenced me and how they're my friends. They're somebody that I can call and I can ask a question. And some of those folks are, Pat O'Brien, Gary Knight, Butch Thompson with Atlanta Coring, Tim Cost,
yeah,
at Wholesome, John Cook, Cecil Bentley, Justin Lazenby now. These are people that I consider my friends, and I can call and ask a question anytime. They'll answer the phone and give me an honest answer. So, yeah.
Well, and what comes to mind as you say that goes back to what you said earlier, and as you noted, it often comes up in these interviews. This is a very, very unique industry. There's so many interdependencies that we need each other.
Yeah,
you can't
absolutely.
if you're one who holds grudges or is combative or whatever term you want to call it, you're not going to make it in construction materials. You depend upon the candor. You depend upon all, because there's so many variables that you're managing.
Absolutely.
We all want to be successful in our own realm, and we realize that in order to do that, we need to foster those friendships, and it's a fun industry. There's no question about it. It'll make you beat your head against the wall some days, but you look at me. I tried to get away. 5 years I was gone, and then back I came to get more. So anyway, kind of winding up here, I do like to hear. I like to hear about our associations, and in your case, we've got two. We've got ACI and GRMCA. So, and I know the benefits are they're similar, but talk about benefits of being involved in these two, in these two important associations.
Yeah, and for both of them, number one is family and association. Who you're going to call. It's putting a name and a face and knowing who to bounce something off of. You don't necessarily get an answer. Just be able to talk and communicate on that, and using both organizations as a technical resource.
Right.
That to me is the benefit.
Huge technical resources.
In a nutshell. There. Yep.
When we were we had our first day of concrete in Savannah the other week. I guess it was last week. Yeah.
It was last week.
And, as I sat there, and we had Kevin Cox, we had George Coons, we had Rob Weilerker and Rick Tilson.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I missing? The lad, Sean
McCormick.
And as they got up there, what you're struck with is just the depth and breadth of technical knowledge, experience, and wisdom. We have in Georgia, in this industry, I think it's safe to say, and I said this when we were at Savannah the other week, some of the brightest minds, the most seasoned, knowledgeable construction material scientists on this planet. Of course, Georgia's a big concrete state. Atlanta is a big concrete city. So but to your point, it's the benefit of ACI and GRMCA is that if you're a member, you've got access to all that expertise, and of course it morphs into friendships, and you enjoy it, and you, if nothing else, you can say something to somebody, not worry if they're going to think I'm an idiot. No, just tell them, ask them a question. So that's good.
I think that relays into, I'm looking at your questions here, your last question about what advice you would give people that are coming into an industry, and that morphs into the things that I would tell people, that you never want to stop learning.
Right.
Even as many presentations as I've done, as many things that I've gone to, even like the Day of Concrete, I couldn't go this time, but I would have gone. I've heard most of everything that's going to be there, but I always like to go, and I always want to listen, because no matter how many times I've been through, somebody says something.
Yes.
That sparks something in my brain that makes sense. And related to that, I would tell people, the other thing is, number one, never stop learning, and listen, because I've had situations in the past where I've gone into a situation I feel like I understand, but you have to take the time and listen to the other person to gather what they're telling you, to make sure you're right, to make sure that things make sense, because it may not. I can remember a couple times early in my career where I wrote a report and I made a statement that I probably shouldn't have, because I was inferring something that in my mind was the issue, but I didn't have something to back it up. And they pointed out that that's not exactly correct, So that, listen. The other thing that's important for people to do is, I don't care what it takes, you always want to strive to do the right thing.
Yes.
You never want to get into a situation where you're trying to, like if you make a mistake, you never want to get in a situation where you're trying to cover up the mistake or trying
Not
to.
in this business.
No, you can't.
No.
I remember one concrete example, pardon the pun, of that was a situation with our good friends at Wayne Davis Concrete. They had a 1,000-yard slab pour, and they called me out to the job site. They had one section of the slab that just didn't set up. It was like one load of concrete.
Yeah.
This magic load of concrete in the middle of this giant pour that didn't set up, and they wanted to know what happened. And I went out and looked at it, looked at the concrete. We took some cores, and I knew that this yard of concrete was mostly Class F fly ash. You're like, how in the world do you get one load of fly ash in the middle of a 1,000-yard pour? And it came down to, it was an early morning pour. One of their truck drivers was delivering a load of ash. He had hooked up to the silos and started blowing off. And he blew off for 5-10 minutes and was like, oh crap, I hooked up to the wrong pipe. He had hooked up to the cement pipe.
Yep.
And he was like, and he fixed it really quick, but he didn't tell anybody.
Thinking that it wouldn't.
He was trying to cover it up. He didn't want to get caught. He didn't want to get in trouble. And they had that, and it wound up costing them a tremendous amount of money to saw out this block of concrete and remove it and report. Where if he had gone to the batch office and said, I made a mistake, they could have looked for that load. They could have and they could have corrected it before it ever. I don't know what happened to that particular driver, but things like that is a clear example. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. But when you do make a mistake, you need to fess up to the mistake, try to correct the problem, and try to move forward. That's always the best approach.
No, that's a great point, Wayne. And wouldn't it be nice if all your troubleshooting experiences were like that, where you could go, this is it?
Yeah.
So many times we have we have one, and they're mysterious. It's very mysterious. But to your point, it's better in our industry, to just
and it kind of a parallel with that is I tell my kids about this too. You always want to try to do your best.
Yes.
You always want to try to do the right thing, and you always try to do the best.
Do the best.
You may not feel like I've been in situations where I'm like, I'm not getting paid enough to do this, but you always want to be your best, because when you're the best, people take notice. You're going to have your opportunity. You're going to get your thing. But if you always do your best, you'll be rewarded for it in the end.
Well, it's like my old buddy David Grayson, who I spoke to. He mentioned this in a podcast I did with him a couple of years ago. But he said, "Yeah, you always want to make yourself indispensable," which is another way. In other words, you've always strived to do excellent work. Going back to working with Don and saying, "I hated to make a mistake." So when it becomes known in time that Wayne Wilson is somebody that can be trusted, somebody that does quality work, he won't tell you something unless he knows it. All of those attributes make you indispensable, make you hard to replace because of not like you're holding back information. But rather you have acquired and accumulated these character traits and qualities that are just tough to find, because it's so much easier to do the other instead of doing the great work. So
I guess the thing I'd probably like to close with that related to that is, I can remember when I was young, some of the things that I struggle with today is that one of my favorite movies as a little kid was growing up was a movie called Hellfighters.
Yeah,
by John Wayne.
Yes.
And it was the Red Adair story.
That's right.
Red Adair was, I think it was a takeoff on Heidelberg at the time, but he was a guy that put out oil well fires. And I can remember the opening episode of that movie. Red Adair, John Wayne, is on his private jet. He's flying, and there's a red phone hanging on the back of the plane, and the phone rings. And it's some sultan in Saudi Arabia that's got an oil well fire. And he's like, okay, I'm on my way. He hangs up the phone, and the jet does a thing, and it starts heading to Saudi Arabia to put out the fire. And in my mind, when I got into this industry and I started learning all this stuff, especially after seeing Don Dixon and the way, I wanted to be that guy.
The Red Adair.
I wanted to be the guy that when you have a problem,
call Wayne.
Right. And I've morphed into that over the years. And now that I'm getting closer to considering retirement, I look back at that and I'm like, is this really what I wanted? Because, so many people do call me all the time. And I don't know. But that's just a funny
You made yourself indispensable.
Exactly. You made me think of that when you said indispensable. But I do enjoy it. I love solving problems, and I hope I can continue to do it for others.
Well, time flies.
Yep.
Doesn't it? And
it does.
And so I wish we had more time, but maybe we'll do a part two.
Okay. I appreciate what you're doing, and I enjoyed it very much.
Me too, Wayne. It's good to enjoy the friendship. It's hard to believe. I'm pushing 25 years. Can't believe that. So thank you again for all you do for us and our producers, and take care.
Thank you. Enjoyed it very much.